Hey everyone, hope you're doing really well. Welcome to this picture video. This is a follow-on from On Location video in South Africa. If you haven't seen that yet, I'm going to leave a link to that in the description down below. So today I'm going to show you the whole editing process of how I turned this raw file into this final image. Just quickly before we jump in, one big tip that I can give is try waiting a number of days, weeks, even up to a month before editing your photographs. For instance, these images were shot on December 12th and I waited all the way until January 5th to even do my initial edits. So give it a go, see if you like that. I find it can provide some sort of emotional distance from the experience and bring a little bit of objectivity into your image selection process and the editing. So without further ado, let's go ahead, jump over into Lightroom and Photoshop and see how I process this image. So the main thing that I want to focus on in this editing tutorial is going to be the power of the curves tool over in Photoshop, and we'll dig into that a little bit later. But first I just wanted to show the sort of overall workflow that I'm using for probably 99% of my images. It all starts, of course, with the raw file. This is just cropped down to the same aspect ratio 4:5 as the final composition. Of course, I then do a black and white conversion, and in Lightroom I'll do a whole heap of global adjustments, and then of course followed by my local adjustments using the curves tool and masking over in Photoshop, and that'll be followed up by some sharpening. So in Photoshop I'm specifically doing local adjustments, and what that means is I'm looking at the tonal balance of this image, assessing it. So if I hit tab, zoom out a bit, we can get a sort of more overall view of the image. These clouds are a bit too bright and overpowering compared to the rest of the image. There's a lot of grays in these parts of the rock and the foreground, so I need to adjust those tones so that they stand up to the relative brightness of these clouds. So how I'm going to do that is using Curves tool paired with some local masks. The first thing I'm going to do, I think, is let's focus on the foreground, bring some contrast, set some white points, and to do that I'm going to actually create a curve, hit G for my gradient tool, and then simply with black and white create a nice feathered selection. And we can just set an S-curve to bring in some contrast into the foreground. So we're going to just keep building up these curves layers until we have a final image that we're happy with. So what I'm doing here is just using the lasso tool to make my selection first, and that way when I hit the curves tool it immediately loads it as a mask. I can then double click it and set the feather to about 50 pixels, which, as you can see here, maybe even a bit more. Let's go up to 75. That should produce a nice soft adjustment. So here I'm just going to also bring in a bit of an S, really trying to almost exaggerate some of the contrast in that bottom rock pool. And I can come in if I think perhaps that this is brightening these too much, I can just soften that down with a brush. So immediately we're already bringing in some nice contrast into the foreground. It's standing up a lot better to the sky. So I might now start moving onto the sky. I think that's starting to look like it's lacking contrast compared to the foreground now. There's a lot of grays and whites. It definitely has the brightness, but I think it just needs to be adjusted a little bit. So what I find with black and white images is if I try to make a select sky, it doesn't have as a refined selection as if I use a color image. And of course that's because it's using some of the color data to produce that selection. So if we go back to our raw file, I've just opened it quickly in Photoshop and do a select sky, you'll see that the marching ants here are much closer and tighter to those rocks and to the horizon line. I can then load it into a curves, Command or Control C and Command or Control V to copy paste that layer into my black and white file. So I now have a curves adjustment with that pretty awesome sky selection loaded as a mask. I can now come in and start to set a black point. You can see immediately the effect that that has. And I'll probably just slightly lift those highlights a bit. Maybe even bring in the whites a touch. And from before to after, the sky's looking pretty great now. I think, let's see where some of these grays are. Those are sort of in the midtones, so we can bring those down just a touch. And I think that's bringing loads of great contrast to the sky. Lastly, I think we need to address the rock, the main rock, and I've left that to last because I want to see what the rest of the image looks like before I do anything to this, so that I can adjust it enough that it becomes the clear focal point of the image. So again, I'm just going in with the lasso tool quickly. Obviously you could do this much more refined if you took the time. It's the same process, setting a feathered edge to the selection so that you're doing a nice, soft, gentle selection. And I think I'm just going to do, you can see with the histogram, we've got blacks, we've got whites. So I just want to add a bit of contrast, really. And that's looking great. So the last thing I want to do to this image is some vignettes. I'm going to do just a regular vignette and then actually an inverted vignette to further focus the attention in the middle of the frame. So for the main vignette, I'm going to do a square selection with the rectangular marquee tool, something like that. Hit the curves tool, invert that so it's now selecting the outside borders of the image. Double click, set a nice extra soft feather, and then bring this down. And for this, you really want to use a very low opacity, so it's something that's just really subtle. You can see it's nicely darkening down the edge of that frame there, and focusing the viewer's attention to the middle. Now I can Control J to duplicate that, inverse that mask, and use it to actually brighten the middle of the frame. So you can see by building up a series of small, subtle, localized adjustments, we've been able to take a relatively flat file, really, and turn it into something that has great contrast and is really quite a punchy black and white image. So that is the final result. I really hope you've enjoyed this one, you've learned something, and you've gotten a bit of insight into the power of the curves tool. Thank you so much for watching. Please do make sure to leave a comment down below, like the video, and of course subscribe to the Pickfair YouTube channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.